I begin today's podcast by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we record today, the Dark and Young people. I pay my respects to elders, past, present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Hello and welcome to another episode of Your Parent Coach. I'm Mel. I'm a parent coach and a youth mentor, and today I'm really lucky to be joined by Dr. Kimberly Rich, who is a grief educator, a death doula, end of life companion, and the founder of Tomorrow Mourning with a U. Uh, After the sudden loss of her mother in 2021, Kim's work has become deeply focused on changing how we approach death and dying and grief, especially in how we support young people, children, and families through loss. So, thank you so much for joining me today, Kim.
Thank you for having me. I love when people are open to talking about this topic. It's hard for so many, so I appreciate being invited in.
Yeah, of course. Just from if we zoom out for a moment, death is part of life. And, I'm yet to meet a young person that has not brought up the topic of grief or death or loss in some capacity. And not always, necessarily someone they directly know, but even just in the world we're living in, the things they see on social media,
Yes.
and online. So, I think it is an important topic. And yeah, I am actually really excited to dive into this. I think it'll be really helpful for the parents listening, but also maybe even something they can listen to with their kids, and kind of share those insights. So let's dive in. I have my first question that I'm asking all my guests, and I'm really excited to hear your answer for this one, but it's what is something that a young person or a child has taught you over the years that you haven't learned through education or training?
Oh gosh. So many things. My first career was as a teacher. So I was an elementary school teacher and then principal for about 20 years. And so I have learned innumerable things from young ones. I think when it comes to the topic that we're talking about today, it's that children have a greater capacity and curiosity than we sometimes give them credit for. So talking about grief is, as you've said, our children are exposed to it. And it might be because a pet has died. It might be because a grandparent or another family member has died. It might be because they heard a friend talk about a pet or, family member dying. And sometimes we get really nervous talking about it because we think that they can't handle it, that they're not old enough, that they'll be too sad. But I'll tell you what, I think children actually do it with greater ease and compassion and comfort than adults do. So I really encourage people to enter those conversations when they see that their children are curious and asking questions.
Yeah, that's a big one. I think we often don't give kids credit for not only just what they can handle or process, but how they handle or process it.
Yes.
And yeah, we can learn a lot from them for that. I really, really believe that. So, if we go back a little bit, your journey, into grief specific education began with the loss of your mother, which my condolences. How
Thank you.
did that experience reshape the way that you understand and support people through grief?
You know what it did for me, and the reason that I went down this road was because as I was grieving the loss of my mom, and you could replace mom, right? With friend, with partner, with child, with whoever your loss is related to. When I was doing that, I felt very overwhelmed and confused. And it, typically, when I feel overwhelmed by something, I lean on my resources, right? You start hitting Google,
Mm.
you grab a book, you listen to a podcast, you just start searching for information. And it was very hard to find the information. It was hard to find things to help you. And so I thought, well, if it's not there, this is my calling to provide it. And so I studied for years to learn more about grief, to learn more about end of life care. That was the focus of my doctoral work. And one of the things that came out of that was that grief is a predetermined part of most of our lives, right? If you are in relationship with people and you yourself live the average lifespan, I think right now is about 75 years. If you live 75 years, you're destined to lose someone you care about.
Mm.
Losing your parents, you might not have had a close relationship with them. Maybe that's not your grief experience, but it's going to be a friend or a parent, a partner, an aunt, an uncle, so many different things. And if this is a part of our destiny to grieve, I don't understand why we're not teaching it. And we're not, at least in the States, we don't. We don't specifically talk about grief. We don't teach grief. We avoid it most of the time because even as teachers, you think, gosh, I don't know, like, will the parents be okay if I say this or if I talk about it? But we're reading books where characters die. And, we are talking about historical events where there were deaths. And I think it's so easy to add little conversations about grief into our teachings as our children are growing up. And I think that we have a responsibility to do that so that when they do have their first grief experience, they have resources to lean on. They have stories, they have wisdom that
Mm.
they can call up when they need it.
That's really interesting. And yeah, I completely agree. We don't teach it in Australia. We don't teach it either. So I don't think it's, unique to the States. I think it's a societal thing where
Yeah.
it's still today in 2026,
Yeah.
still a little bit taboo to talk
It
about,
is.
right?
Yes.
It's like, oh,
And
don't
you only
do
end up
that.
learning through experience,
Yeah,
right? So once you
yeah,
experience it, you learn, but that's not the best way. The information's out there.
yeah.
So we
It's
need to
not.
talk about it.
It's not the best way to go in unprepared, right? Like everything else
Right.
in life, we try and learn ahead of experiences. You
Yep.
you learn, for example, maths in a classroom so that you know how to do
Yes.
maths later in life. You don't just get thrown into the workplace and have to learn maths.
Could you imagine? Yeah,
Right?
that would be
But
really
but
hard.
it's the
Yes,
same thing
it
because you're
is.
thrown into a situation where something has happened, someone like and also grief comes in lots of different, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it comes in lots of different forms, not just loss, right? Like it can
You're
just
right.
change.
People grieve the end of a relationship, even if someone has not died. People grieve their parents getting divorced. People grieve a move if they have to move or the loss of a job. Or, yes, I mean, we could have a whole nother podcast just on
100%.
what you can grieve. And so it is a part of our destiny. And I argue that it is unfair not to prepare our children for that. So that's a big part of my pitch. I work with schools. I do professional development for schools. I do teacher education. And a big part of that is this passion I have for empowering children so that when they are teens and young adults and old adults and they hit their first grief experience, they have somewhere to at least place their feet, right? They have somewhere to start. It's not going to take the grief away or make it a joy to walk through, but it is going to help so that they don't feel like they're doing it wrong or they are broken or, anything else. I think I could talk about it for too
Yeah.
long. So I'll stop there.
No,
But
no. It leads me to my next question anyway, which is the power. You talk about the power of relationship in
yeah.
grief. And like, how does that look in practice? Where do we tend to misstep as a society, as people coming together? As I think it's important to have that conversation, but yeah, how do we navigate that?
Yeah, Mel, I think one of the biggest things is that we don't show up.
Mm.
And sometimes that's at the beginning, but more often it's at week 3 and month 4 and year 2 that I don't think I don't think, let me preface that with, I don't think people mean harm. Again, I don't think people know. I don't think we've done a good job teaching. I'll keep going back to that over and over again. But we need to show up and we need to know. our people well enough to know that they just need us to be there. They don't need us to have the answers. They don't need us to have the right words. They just need our presence. And sometimes in the immediate days following a grief experience, there will be people who won't show up. I'm uncomfortable, right? Or God, we only do the good things. Or, gosh, I don't know what to say to her. Or I haven't seen her in a year. I don't know that she wants me there. They do. People want to be surrounded and held up. And do you know the game Red Rover?
Yes.
And you know how you would link hands and people would try to run through and break through your
Mhm.
hands, right? And I'm like doing it right now, but you can't see it. And I think grief is a little bit like that. We need people to surround us and just lock their hands and be there
Yeah.
and just kind of feel like we're protected by them and by that. And we need to know that grief typically does not go away after a week or after 2 weeks. So that first week, you're going to have 30 people show up or 50 people show up. But then by week 3, everybody's gone back to work and they've gone back to their soccer schedules and they've gone back to school and they tend to forget that you're still in this home that now feels foreign to you and that your best friend is gone or the person you used to have dinner with every night is gone and so in relationship we need people to just keep showing up without being invited, without being asked. And we also need to be in relationship with other people who understand grief. And that's a part of it too, is you are going to have clumsy people
Hmm.
who show up. That's still good. We'll take the clumsy, right? Come. But we also need the people who know what it feels like to be a griever, who know what it feels like when a song comes on the radio that reminds you of your person and makes you sad out of nowhere, or the person who understands that sometimes cooking food you have no capacity for, not to even think about what you want or how to make it, or that the person who died is the person who used to change your light bulbs. And it sounds really stupid, but I don't know how to change a light bulb now. And what do I do? And who do I call? And so we need people who kind of understand what grief looks like and what grief feels like. And we need them to show up and tell us
Mm.
that we're doing okay.
Yeah. And letting the person who's grieving share without you as the non-griever in the situation,
Yes.
feeling um feeling some type of way. Like it's okay to just let them say what they need to say, talk about the person, whatever they
Yes.
need to do, because everybody's different. But I think sometimes we get caught up in our own bias of what we would do,
Yes.
right? Rather
The
than like
judgment. Yeah.
person just process however they may
Yeah.
process. And I bring a personal lens to this because I lost my grandmother. I think it's going on, it'll be 3 years this year, which is crazy to
I'm
me.
sorry for your loss. Yeah.
Thank you. But yeah, it was really sudden, but she was like my best friend. She was like,
Yeah.
I was like so close with her. And to this day, I have this motif of her, which is a ladybug. And
Oh,
I
look,
have,
wait, wait.
I wish I
I
could
have a
do.
bumblebee. Okay, I don't know if
Oh
I can show you. I have
my
a
gosh,
bumblebee from
yes,
my
I love
mom.
it. Okay, so this so my grandmother shows up in ladybugs everywhere, in my house, in my laundry, everywhere.
Yeah.
She's always around and I see symbols of them everywhere. Every time I go to a market, there's something ladybug paraphernalia. So my house is now filled with ladybugs. But when people come over and they see it or they
Yes.
see my tattoo and they ask about it and I get excited to tell them, I'm like, this represents my grandmother. She's passed away, but this is her. And I
Gosh, I
like to
love that.
talk about it and tell her story. And some people, that's uncomfortable for them, right? Because
Yes.
they don't want to talk about the person that you've lost. Whereas I'm excited, I want to tell you about her. I want to, tell you how amazing she was and, the things she used to do and how she shows up. And sometimes, there'll
Yes.
be a ladybug outside and I'll text my friends and I'll be like, look, she's here, she's saying hi. And I think it's just a good example of how, grief shows up in different people, but how grief doesn't necessarily mean you're sad all the time.
Correct.
It just might mean
Yes.
you need to share.
And all of what you just said is true for children also, right? And we're not going to have our children get tattoos, but they're going to be thinking about those people. They're going to be thinking about their pet. They're going to be,
Yeah.
and let them share a story and make sure you've created an environment where it's comfortable for them to say, "Oh my gosh, I saw a ladybug today, Mom. It made me think of grandma," right? Or
Mhm.
to tell their teacher, and I'm the same as you, like in the room I'm in, I have putty that
Yeah.
has bees in it. I have a dish here that has a bee in it. And
Yeah.
so every time I'm somewhere and I see a bee, I'm like, "Oh, my mom."
Literally.
And
Yeah.
then children are going to do that too. And let them and smile with them, right?
Yeah.
And say, "Oh my gosh, that's so cool that grandma visited you today," right? And how
Yeah.
did you feel when you saw
Yeah.
that? And yeah, I think that applies to adults, it applies to children, but grief can be moments of sadness, it can be laughter, it can be reflection, it can be all of the different feelings.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one because, as I said, like sharing that motif with my friends, and, sometimes
Yeah.
they'll see things and now they understand how I'm processing it. But if they see a
Yeah.
ladybug, they'll be like, look, it's for you. Like,
Isn't that funny?
isn't that
Yeah.
funny? And then also my nephews who are they are I think 10 and 12 years old. And I stayed with them a little while ago, and they went to the market after school, and I was just at home at their place working, so I wasn't with them. And they came home with this little hand crocheted little flower with a ladybug on it. And one of them goes, "We got this for you
Oh,
because I saw it, and I know that ladybugs are your
I
thing."
love that.
And they brought it home for me, and I was like, that's
That's
also just,
amazing.
but it's kids are, they recognize different things in symbols, and
Yes.
how that represents different things. And they also knew my grandmother, and they were like, they loved her too. And so
Of
then now
course.
they have that power of association with ladybugs. So whenever they
Yes.
see something, they're like, we've got to tell Mel. And it's one of those things. I think that, perfect segue into my next question, which is parents feel so unprepared to how to support their child through grief. And I want to use the pet example because I think that's probably going to
Yeah.
be the most common,
Most common. Yeah.
especially if your kids are getting in, and this podcast is mainly for parents with tweens or teens. By that age, if your kid's turning, 12, 13,
Hmm.
the family dog has grown up with them and the dog is
Yep.
getting older, right? And so this is kind of the time when you start to experience your first pet loss. I know for me, I lost my first pet when I would have been 14. And so, parents feel lost, and how do we navigate this? They've probably already been through a couple of pet losses maybe in their life as an
Yep.
adult. And, how can they support their child without leaning into those misconceptions around grief?
Some of the first things that I teach parents when I'm working with them is one, to share your own grief with your children, right? We're always modeling. So
Mm.
just like, I think like a common piece of parenting advice would be not to cuss in front of your children because then they might use those words. S- it's very similar, right? That you're probably grieving the pet also. Share that, talk about it, model it,
Mm.
engage your children in that process. Acknowledge that grief is something real and something that we need to talk about and move through. Especially when it comes to teens and in children in their maybe early 20s. I always say to invite, but don't force,
Mm.
right? So maybe your dog has died and the dog has been cremated, and you're going to go spread the dog's ashes in his favorite lake where you used to take him swimming and play, and invite them, right? Dad and I are going to go do this, or I am going to go do this. Would you like to come with me? But, when they're old enough, let them make their own decision about that and say, yes, I would like to. Or they might be nervous and say, I don't know, what does that mean? What does it look like? Well, let me tell you a little bit more, right, about what we're going to do. Similar to you having the ladybug, I always think that when we're grieving, it's nice to have something that reminds us of the person or the pet that we are grieving. And so we had a dog who died about 2 years ago now.
Mm.
And right before we knew he was going to die, and right before we actually got his footprint with ink on a
Mhm.
piece of paper. And that was a great way to get it. I know some people who have done it like they've done a mold, but we did it on paper because we could make copies for it. And I have 4 children. And so then we could make a copy for each child, put it in a frame for each of them. So everybody just has this like little square frame. It's not huge in their rooms with the paw print. And, just something that serves as a little reminder that this pet was a part of our family and that we do miss the pet and want to remember him. um, you know, Going through photos.
Yeah.
Most people have photos with their pet, or you have photos with your grandmother, or photos with your friend, and go through those photos and share stories, right? Why did you take a photo of your pet in that moment? And again, teens love staring at their phones, right?
Mhm.
Go through your phone. Do you have any pictures
Yeah.
of the dog, of the cat? Send them to the family group text if you have them. So, like, engage your children by saying, I would love photos of, our dog's name was Chili. I would love photos of Chili. Will you guys go through your pictures and see if you have any and send them to me if you do? And again, that kind of just, it gives them a role. It gives them a job to do, something tangible that they can kind of put their energy into. Um, Give them space to grieve. Like, if you want to stay home from school tomorrow, you can,
Yeah.
but make sure you help encourage them to balance their grief
Yeah.
with real life also, right? So, at what point are you going to re-enter and go back? And how are you going to tell people? People are going to say, "Why were you gone?" What do
Mm.
you want your response to be, right? And talk about that. And they may say, I don't want to tell people that
Yeah.
the dog died or that grandma died, or I'm worried that I'm going to cry at school and I don't want to. Um, I would encourage my kids personally to just try to be brave and tell their friends and know that it's okay if you cry.
Yeah.
But if they're really feeling uncomfortable with that, I would help them think of something else they could say that's honest,
Yeah.
but maybe not going to be as emotional, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
maybe it was that we had a family event, which we did, but I would help them think of what they can say that won't feel quite as intimidating. So, those
Yeah.
are some ideas that I have. If your child is really struggling and won't talk about it, one of the things I do with my clients is recommend books.
Yeah.
And even with teens, reading a novel where a character dies. If it's with a younger child, you could read something like Charlotte's Web, where
Mhm.
Charlotte dies, right? And these are fictional characters, but having conversations about the characters and their grief sometimes can be easier than having a conversation about your own.
Yeah, 100%. And I think by having those conversations, I know some parents get worried, oh, like that my child's going to be, scared of death and have all these questions. And actually, it's going to have the opposite effect. More often
It
than not,
is.
you see kids that are afraid of death or afraid of talking about it or obsessed with it. You also see kids that are obsessed with
Yes.
death. Is because they don't have, yeah, or they didn't have access to those resources or
They
those.
don't have the information.
That's
Yeah.
right. So then they make up stories in their head
Yes.
because that's what kids are good at.
And if they are scared, we want to help them get through that because it is our destiny.
Yeah.
Someday we are going to die, and we want our children to be okay when we do. And someday they are going to die, and we don't want them to be fearful about, like, it's a natural part of our life process. And so if they're scared, it isn't helpful to avoid it. But
No,
what is more helpful is to have those healthy conversations about it and try to break down that fear. We're probably never going to get to a point where we are joyful about death, right? But we don't want people so scared that they can't even talk about it.
no. And I think one thing that helps me when I work with, for example, teenagers that are either in this catastrophizing
Yes.
phase, and
Yes.
especially it happens with teenagers because they're going through such a big change in their life and they start to
Yes.
realize that they're growing up, and that can be a scary thing. And
Of
so
course.
it brings up all these questions and feelings of, and so what I like to do is actually bring out more of a visual representation of life and the life timeline, and show them where they're
Mhm.
at on the timeline. And I look at,
Oh, sure.
the average lifespan and say,
75, 80 years,
that's
right?
right. This is where you're at. This is, and also getting them to think about, okay, do you know any people who are in their 80s? Are your grandparents in their
Yeah.
80s? Do you know, like, should we go and visit some people in a retirement home? You
Yes.
know, what's going to make you feel better, and how can we navigate this? And you can ask these older people some questions. What would they have
Mhm.
liked to have, not necessarily done in their life, but what things are they proud of in
Of
their life?
course.
What things do
Yes.
they, have good memories of, whether it be travel or whatever, and then refocus them on the things that they can control, which is the life they live,
Yeah.
the way they speak to others, those kind of
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
I love that. I love the timeline. I'm going
Mm.
to steal that from you.
Yeah,
But
please.
yeah, I love that. I love it.
Yeah, I think it's a powerful one for parents because, I think it works also for pets, right? Because we know pets don't have as big of a lifespan as, and I think when I got my first pet, that was something that was made really clear to me, because the reason why my parents didn't want me to get a dog was because they don't last forever. And
Sure.
and they explained that to me. They were like, you can get this dog, that's absolutely fine, but you've got to know that you're going to live to this many years, and this dog
Yeah.
is only going to live to this many years.
Sadness is going to come, right? That's a part
Yeah,
of this.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's that preparatory, it's not depressing to talk about it, it's
I
just
agree with you.
reality, right?
It's being proactive. It's
Yeah.
being, like you said, like we're going to teach about math, right? That's important. So, yeah.
We got to know before we, and some kids might say, "Oh, well, I don't want to do that because I want this dog to be with me forever." And I think that sometimes because we don't have those conversations, we're not preparing them for the reality of pet care,
Yeah.
and that dog was mine, and she was my responsibility. And unfortunately, she didn't live her, 10 years. She only lived 7,
Oh,
um,
oh,
because of a snake. But it's also
oh
those things,
no.
yeah. So it's those things that come up, right?
That's
And that
tragic.
that was quite tragic. But how we navigated that was, communicating. We live in the bush. We live in a rural community. We live in an area where there are snakes and there are risks, and these things can
Right.
happen. And I think, one thing my parents did do a really good job of was educating us about those risks, and knowing that it was always a possibility.
That's good. Kudos to them for doing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right from the beginning, just setting up your expectations so that they were realistic.
Yeah. And look, it didn't hurt any less, but at least
Of course
I
not.
didn't have to grapple with the why factor.
Yes.
I feel like a lot of kids struggle with the why. And
Yes, they do.
if you've prepared them with those messages ahead of time as to how and why things may and can happen in life, then yeah, it applies to everything. I think that ties into my last question, which is about community and why it's so important, as you said at the start, for navigating grief. What are some like easy ways, simple ways that parents can invite community support in when either they're grieving alongside their children or their child is grieving something in particular? What are some ways that, yeah, we can build that community without, overwhelm?
Sure. I think that number one, it's recognizing that you need the community and that doing it alone isn't something that is going to be sustainable. So it's starting by saying we need this, right? And then it is trying to figure out who your helpers are and where your helpers are. And um, part of, well, let me go back. I start by telling people that you usually want it to be people who are a little bit separated from the loss, right? So other people who have shared this same loss. So maybe if I have lost my mother, My sisters probably aren't the best people to be in my community that is going to help me through my grief because they're grieving the same person. And I'm going to need something different than one sister, and we're going to need something different than the other sister. So you want people who are a little more removed, but who maybe did know your
Mm,
person. Um, you're going to want people who you're going to be able to tell pretty quickly who understands your grief and makes you feel more comfortable and who doesn't. And sometimes that's going to surprise you. I
yeah.
think if you and I both were to list people right now, if I said, Mal, list three people you think will be your support system, um, you might be surprised. And I think if I listed three people, I might be surprised because the people who are our closest friends and most trusted confidants are not always the people who know how to support us through grief because grief is so unique. So you would list three people who are your ride or die people, right? Who you're going to call
Mm,
all the time, who you text every day, and they might not be your people, but you're going to see right away who seems to have the instinct, who has the intuition, who has made you feel softer, more comfortable. Who are the people you can share your anger with, your
mm,
sadness with, your joy with? You want it to be people who you are completely, authentically you and not having to worry at all about the words that come out of your mouth because you, your children, you're all going to go through those stages of grief. You are going to have moments of anger, and you want people who can receive that anger without trying to fix it or tame it, but let those words come out of your body. And
mhm,
you need people who are going to accept the sadness.
mm,
That when you start crying because you just drove past the last restaurant you had dinner at your dad with before your dad died, they're not gonna, you know, the friends who like panic and they're like, don't cry, it's okay, don't cry.
yeah,
You
yeah,
want someone who's gonna say, tell me about that dinner.
yeah, yeah.
It's okay that you're
Lean
crying. Tell
in.
me about
Mm,
dinner. What did you have? What did you and your dad talk about? Was it a nice night? Was
mm,
it not a nice night? I'm okay hearing about that too.
mm,
So you want in your community the people who make you feel safe. You want in your children's community the people that make your children feel safe. Your children, if they're returning to school, whether they are 8 years old, whether they are 18 years old, a great thing to talk to them about because they'll be carrying their grief to school with them is who are your safe adults at school? And it might be a teacher you had 3 years ago. It might not be a teacher you have now. It might be someone who works in the office. It might be the nurse. It might be the PE teacher. But who is it? Talk about that with your kids so they know who they can go to if that grief hits them while they're at school. If they start feeling sad and they want to talk to someone, right? You have to actually think about, and adults, same thing. Who is it at work?
yeah.
I'm going to go back to work and still be grieving. Who am I going to go to if I need to cry for a few minutes at work? Who's going to let me cry? Who can I go say, will you pick up the phone for me? I'm not going to answer the phone for a few minutes, right?
Mm,
And think about these things before you go back to school and before you go back to work, because it is inevitable
yeah,
that you are going to feel grief outside of your home. And so you're building your community slowly. The answers that probably seem more obvious, but in case they don't, would be that, there are probably grief resources within your community. If there are not, there are online.
yeah.
I myself have online Zoom groups. I have a school course. The school is an online platform, but we have like if you go online and look, you'll also find groups. You'll find groups that are specific to
Mm,
parent loss, partner loss, child loss. So everybody in that group knows on a very intimate level what you're feeling. So look in your community, look, your hospitals might have recommendations for these groups, right? If you're religious, your faith organization may have links to some of these groups and say, there's a group that meets every Tuesday night at the coffee shop, or a group that meets right here at your synagogue or your church. And so ask, because these groups aren't hidden, but they're also not advertised as much as they should be. So look, and if you can't find anything nearby, start looking online because there are options there.
Yeah, that's a really important one, I think. And particularly in Australia, we do have good resources, but you're right, they're not advertised. And so if you don't
Mhm.
know where to start, literally start with a Google, and put your area or,
Yes. And
country.
grief resources.
That's right. And just
Yes.
brief resources online or whatever, and something will come up. But yeah, there's always support. In Australia we have the kids helpline if your kids need someone to speak to, and we have like
Wonderful.
as well for adults and young people if you need to speak to someone like ASAP, ring those numbers. I'll make sure to put them in the show notes. And I guess if people want to learn more about you, to connect with you, where can they find you online?
I am on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I don't use it as much. So Instagram's a little bit better. It's Tomorrow Mourning, Mourn. I thought I was very clever, but it makes it hard for people to find. So
I love it. I
Tomorrow
love a
Morning.
pun.
I do too. I do too. Find it very creative. But it's Tomorrow Morning LLC, and that is me on socials. My website is tomorrowmorningllc also.com. So tomorrowmorningllc.com, Tomorrow Morning LLC on socials. My email is tomorrowmorningllc@gmail.com. So reach out. Like if you look for me, you'll probably find me. I have a couple published articles. I have been on several podcasts. So if you just start searching, you'll find a way to reach out to me if you would like to.
Amazing. Yes, I think it's such a valuable topic, a valuable resource, a valuable mission that you have. And
Thank
I
you.
think, so many people are going to benefit from listening to this episode. I am yet to meet someone who has not been impacted by grief in some capacity. And
Right?
I think it is such a life skill, if I'm honest, that when it's a core piece that's missing. And yeah, I'm really, really glad that we got to have this conversation today. Is there anything you want to leave our audience with? Any last golden nuggets of wisdom?
Um, Gosh, I think that, my parting words would just be to not be afraid to engage, not be afraid to learn more about end of life, to learn more about grief, to read the books, to listen to the podcasts, and to not only talk to your kids, but to encourage even adults, to engage more and to learn more, that this is something. I think so many more people, I'm shocked at how many conversations I'm in where I end up saying to someone, this is grief.
Yeah.
You're grieving. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's people who are talking to me about things happening in the United States right now, right? And I say that you're grieving. You're
Mhm.
grieving because this doesn't look the way you thought it would, right? Or be like this is grief. Or sometimes it's people talking to me about their financial situation, or it's so vast,
It's it's
what
massive.
that word grief encompasses. So learn more and start talking about it. And I think you'll be shocked at how it will help you in your own life with the things you might be grieving.
100%. And my last parting statement for everybody to think on is I talk about this concept a lot, but I want everybody to sit with it, is if you are a parent and you have a tween or a teen or your child is going into that phase, you will be grieving the loss of your
Holy
young
smokes.
child. right?
Yes, you
So,
will. Yes, you will.
so be prepared for that
Yeah.
by doing all of these things that, we've spoken about today, and just acknowledge that it is grief that you're experiencing because your child is no longer who they once
Needing you as much, no longer thinks you're the wisest person in the room, right?
were.
Because your child isn't home as much and you're grieving the loss of a friend and someone you used to hang out with and watch shows with. So that my oldest is 23 years old. I have a 21-year-old and an 18-year-old. And that process of letting go
Mhm.
is absolutely a grief experience that comes also with joy in watching them become young adults and become independent. But there is a grief element. So you nailed it, Mel. You nailed it. Yeah.
Yes. And so I think it's an important one. And no matter, how your life is looking at the moment, if you're not, experiencing grief, good for you. But
How
also,
lucky. Yes,
yeah, woo. But also, it's okay. No matter where you're
it
at,
is.
if you are, if you're not, remember that someone around you might be, and just be open to the possibility of being part of someone's community, like we said. And I will make sure to pop all of the links and resources in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here, Kim. Um,
Thanks for having
I could
me.
literally talk to you about this for the rest of our lifespan.
That is great job security for me. So that's what I need is people to want to talk about it. So that's great.
That's it. Thank you so much. And I will
Thank
catch
you.
everybody else in the next episode. Bye.